I've been playing Destiny again lately, and after the April update, I have to say, the game has improved a lot. If you've never played Destiny or just haven't played it in a while, basically what they've done is streamline progression to be less RNG focused and more about grinding certain activities. What they've done recently is a huge step in the right direction, but I have some other ideas on how to make Destiny even better. First, and this seems like a no-brainer, something everyone has been asking for since day one, put the Grimoire cards into the game. Since the game itself is fairly devoid of story, the Grimoire cards are the only way to learn more about the Destiny universe. Currently, you have to go to the Bungie website to view them, and I think most people just don't even bother. If they were put into the game, maybe accessible from a console and social areas, I know I'd read them. Or how about this? Go the Dark Souls route and put little pieces of story onto items. Some items already have little quotes associated with them, but I want more. When I get Lord Whoever's auto rifle, I want to know who he was, how he died, and what he did. Just a few sentences, viewable from the item's inspection screen, to tell me more about the Destiny universe. Okay, another big one that people have been saying since the Taken King expansion: don't trivialize old content. Now, I never played in year one, but I know exactly how people feel when a new expansion comes out and it makes the old raids and content completely pointless. They do this in World of Warcraft, and it's irritating. Why limit the amount of meaningful content? Bungie has said something about wanting people to focus on new content, and I understand that, but do they really think that people aren't going to do the new content? Yeah, I hate new things so much that I'm not going to try out the new raids and new strikes and missions. Really, the reason they do this is to try and force people to buy the expansion, and that alone drives people away. Recently, Bungie has reintegrated Prison of Elders and some of the old strikes into the game, and that's definitely a step in the right direction, but I think they should bring the old raids and other content back as well. One of my problems with Destiny is, while there are 3 different classes, they don't really feel that different. You get 3 abilities, which are basically Grenade, Melee, and Super. Grenades and Melees are pretty much the same across the board for all classes and subclasses. The only really distinguishing differences are the Supers. I know someone is going to argue that, oh, Hunters get 15% more movement speed on his extra jump or something, but I don't care. I'm not talking about those small differences. Now, I understand that Destiny is a shooter. We can't really have tanking and healing like in typical MMOs, but there are still certain ways to make the classes more diverse. Currently, there are class-specific weapons, but here's an idea. How about class-specific weapon archetypes? For example, Hunters already have the Shadow Shot ability where they fire an energy bow. Why not make bows a class-specific weapon archetype? They could be secondary weapons that function similarly to sniper rifles. Maybe some have more range but take longer to draw. Maybe there could be an exotic one that lets you fire 2 or 3 arrows at once, and it function more like a pulse rifle. Or the arrows bounced around corners like with the hard light auto rifle. Titans could have shields. This would probably take up the heavy slot, and they would do exactly what you would expect them to do: block damage. The Cabal already use shields like this, why not have something similar to that players can use? Maybe some shields would have different aspects to them. So, for example, what if you could get a Taken shield that has the same ability to knock back enemies? Think about how interesting and useful that would be in both PvE and PvP. Titans could be more like mobile fortresses that protect their allies. Isn't that kind of what the class is supposed to be about? And Warlocks, here's an idea. How about gauntlet weapons? Basically think of something similar to Iron Man's repulsor. This would probably be a primary weapon type, and different ones could function different ways. Maybe one shoots bolts of lightning and functions like a scout rifle. Maybe have one that shoots little pulses of energy and it function more like a burst rifle. Of course, all of these things would need to be balanced, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. All of this stuff is already in the game in some form already. I'd also like to see more interesting perks on armor. I feel like weapons are in a pretty good spot with perks. They could certainly use some rebalancing because there are a lot of perks that are just worthless, but at least there are a lot of perks. Armor gets almost nothing. What are the perks? Oh, my pulse rifle upgrades slightly faster? Oh boy, can't live without that. I get an unnoticeable amount of jump height after scoring a double kill and only when using a certain subclass? Wow, I'm so glad I have that perk. Armor needs some work. Give it more interesting and more varied perks so that you can actually care about more than just the light level. Some examples could be increased movement speed on boots, helmets that highlight enemies similar to how some gun sights do, chest armor that maybe reduces the amount of damage you take from melee hits. Those are all just things I thought of within a few minutes. I'm sure Bungie could do better. Okay, now those are all changes that could be done to the game currently with relative ease. But I do have even bigger ideas too. These are all things that could be done in a future expansion or big update like whatever Destiny 2 could be. I'd like to see a new class, which I'm calling the Warden. The Warden specializes in healing and support. One of their supers could be the area around him rapidly heals and restores shields for a few seconds. Or perhaps another super could be putting up a wall of light between you and the enemy. This would work similarly to the Titan bubble, except friendlies could shoot through it. Of course, this would have to be balanced somehow, so maybe it took less damage before breaking, or maybe just the fact that it's only covering one side of you instead of being a 360 bubble like the Titan. The Warden's class item would be Wings to complete the whole healer aesthetic. How about a new subclass type? Ice. Ice abilities would do things like slow enemies down or freeze them in place. So for example, an ice grenade would put a spot on the ground that lasts a short time and any enemies that move over it are slowed. Or how about a grenade that snares enemies in place? They would still be able to look around and shoot, but their feet would be stuck to the ground for a few seconds. These kinds of abilities would do less damage than typical grenades and melees, but they would have a lot of utility. Here's something that I'm sure a lot of people want to see, a new enemy type. We'll call them Rebels. The Rebels are humans who don't follow the Traveler. They think it's an evil entity or some false god or something. Think about how cool that would be to fight enemies who use the same kind of technology that you have, and that includes Guardians. Rogue Guardians that use the same abilities as players. Lore-wise, I don't really know, but Bungie could figure it out. And finally, my biggest change to Destiny would be to do away with the light system as we know it. The problem with light is that when you're leveling up, you don't really get to choose what your stats are or what perks you want. It's all about what your light level is. If that number is higher, equip it. Now with the way infusions work, especially after the April update, it's better, but I think it can still be improved. Now we can't do away with light altogether because it's still necessary. Basically, light is a quick way to see a person's overall power level, and a game like Destiny needs something like that. So here's what I would do. Make armor have a possibility of giving 6 stats instead of the current 3. What are those other 3 stats? Well, we already have them in the game. Along with discipline, intelligence, and strength, put armor, agility, and recovery on armor pieces. And this one change would make selecting which armor you use so much more important. Now things would need to be tweaked in balance, obviously, because we don't want one stat being way more important than others. And maybe add some kind of damage stat that makes your shots with whatever weapon you use do slightly more damage. Kind of like how light currently works. But with this system, you would have to choose between, do I want more armor, or do I want to do more damage? Or is it more important for my build to have less grenade or super cooldown? It would force players to make actual choices with their armor instead of just mindlessly equipping whatever item has a higher light. Right now, as a Titan, when I look at armor, all I want is intelligence and discipline. My melee is pretty much pointless for both PvE and PvP, so strength isn't even really an option. So how would light level work into this system? Well, really easily. Let's say I have a piece of gear that gives plus 45 intelligence and plus 45 discipline. That piece of gear is worth 90 light. It would be on par with a piece of gear that, let's say, gives 90 intelligence. And taking into account the average stat across all your gear, you would still be able to arrive at a light level that is representative of your power level. Now how would this work for the Crucible? Well, once again, really easily. Bungie wants everyone to be on the same ground in the Crucible regardless of how good their gear is. So all the game would have to do is look at people's stats and give them bonuses based on a percentage of their total stats. That's a little bit complicated, but let me try to explain. Let's say player 1 is maxed out on gear. He's got 300 intelligence and 300 strength and 0 in everything else. Now let's say player 2 is brand new and he only has 5 in discipline and 5 in intelligence. Now in a PvE situation, obviously 300 is more than 5, so player 1 is going to have a massive advantage. He's got both those stats maxed out, so he's got really quick grenades and super, while player 2 barely has any stats, so he's probably not getting anything. But in PvP, they would be on equal ground. Because with that system, the game would say, okay, player 1, 50% of your stats are to reduce grenade cooldown, and 50% of your stats are to reduce super cooldown. And player 2, same thing. 50% of your stats are to reduce grenade cooldown, and 50% of your stats are to reduce super cooldown. It wouldn't matter how much of each stat you had, it would only matter what your build looked like. People would have a completely equal footing in PvP while still having advantages over lesser geared players in PvE. So anyway, those are my proposed changes for Destiny. Tell me what you think in the comments. I'm not a professional player or anything, so try not to hate me too much if I got some word or some ability name wrong. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm Kothrex, and you have a wonderful day. Today I'd like to give a shout out to Boss Fight. They're a great band who does sort of retro video game music. It's hard to explain, so you should just take a look. Anyway, they're allowing me to use their music in my videos, which I'm thrilled about. Now I can use more than just the stuff from the YouTube audio library. Thanks again to Boss Fight. If you like music from games, go check them out.